I want to be honest with you about something before we get into this. The idea of a method, any method, applied to another human being with the goal of producing a specific emotional response in them, sits uncomfortably with me. And I think if you sit with it honestly, it probably sits uncomfortably with you too. Because somewhere underneath the hope that a technique will work, there is a person who simply misses someone, who is in pain, who wants to know if there is a way back that does not require humiliating themselves or pretending the hurt did not happen, or sending a message into the silence and waiting for a response that may never come. That is a real and human thing to feel, and it deserves a real and honest answer. So here is what I actually know about re-establishing contact with an avoidant after distance or a breakup. Not as a manipulation strategy, but as an honest account of what tends to work, what tends to backfire, and why the difference between the two matters far more than the specific words you use. The first thing to understand is what the avoidance nervous system is doing in the silence. As I've talked about in other videos, the initial period after distance or a breakup tends to bring the avoidant relief. The pressure is gone, the emotional weight has lifted, and in that decompression, any contact from you, however gentle, however well-intentioned, is likely to be experienced as the return of that pressure. Which means timing is not a small thing, it is almost everything. Reaching out too soon does not just risk rejection, it actively reinforces the avoidance narrative that the relationship was overwhelming, that you cannot manage the distance, that your emotional world is still structured around their availability. And every piece of evidence that supports that narrative makes it harder, not easier, for them to move towards you. So the first and most important element of any contact after distance is not what you say. It is having genuinely waited long enough that the silence has done its work. Not as a tactic, not as a performance of not needing them, but as a real period where you turned your attention back towards your own life, where you processed what happened honestly, where you arrived at a place where reaching out came from a genuine desire to connect, rather than from an anxiety that could not tolerate the quiet any longer. The avoidant can feel the difference between those two things in a single message. They are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional texture. A message sent from desperation feels different from a message sent from groundedness, even if the words are almost identical. When the timing is right, and only you can honestly know when that is, the nature of the contact matters enormously. What works is something small, something that does not carry the weight of everything that happened. Not an apology for the entire relationship, not a carefully constructed case for why things could be different, not a question about where things stand or what they are feeling or whether there is still something worth exploring. Something small and real and low pressure. A reference to something specific that genuinely reminded you of them, something you encountered in your actual life that had an honest connection to who they are or what you shared. Not manufactured, not designed to seem casual while obviously being anything but. Actually small, actually genuine. The purpose of that kind of contact is not to reopen the relationship in a single message. It is to create a moment of connection that does not ask for anything in return. That simply says, without pressure or agenda, I thought of you and I wanted to say so. That kind of message does something specific to an avoidant. It removes the thing their defense system most needs to justify continued distance. The sense that engaging with you means being pulled back into something overwhelming. A message with no demand attached to it, no emotional weight requiring a response, no implicit expectation of a particular outcome, does not trigger the withdrawal reflex in the same way. It lands differently. It creates a small, low-stakes opening rather than a large, high-stakes confrontation. What happens next is out of your hands. And I mean that not as a deflection, but as something worth genuinely absorbing. You cannot control their response. You cannot engineer the outcome. You can only control the honesty and the groundedness of what you offer. If they respond, something is possible. What that something is will reveal itself slowly and will require honest assessment from you about whether what is being offered is actually what you need. If they do not respond, you have your answer, and an answer, even a painful one, is worth more than indefinite uncertainty. Because you cannot build anything real in the space between sending and waiting. You can only build it in the truth of what comes after.